Morning, Mike. Did you get moved into the Major's room?
Good morning, Captain. Sorry I'm late. Yes, I'm moved, but I have some settling in yet to do. Think it might rain.
Not according to the forecast, but the satellite picture shows a warm front approaching from the southwest, so an afternoon thunderstorm wouldn't be a surprise.
Last night I dreamed of flying in one of those towering cumulus clouds you described, Captain. Most likely inspired by our Himango flight. What a wild ride and fascinating adventure. The popping out into the skyscape was priceless. Not much compared to your actual flights in them, though, I suppose.
Last night I dreamed of flying in one of those towering cumulus clouds you described, Captain. Most likely inspired by our Himango flight. What a wild ride and fascinating adventure. The popping out into the skyscape was priceless. Not much compared to your actual flights in them, though, I suppose.
Ah, yes. Dreams can take us anywhere without limits, can't they, Captain? Especially your flying dreams. And there's often such a thin line between them and reality.
Yes, Mike, after all, some of the most significant events of our lives occur entirely within our own minds. Our imaginations, inspirations, and dreams can become important realities.
As with levitation, Captain?
I think so, Mike, but you might say I'm an eccentric to believe that.
Not at all, Captain. Doesn't everyone strongly believe in many things they have never seen or experienced firsthand, which defy scientific proof? God, for example? Wouldn't life have much less meaning without dreams, aspirations, hopes, faith, and beliefs? Weren't many great scientific discoveries inspired, born, and nurtured inside scientists' heads? I happen to believe in levitation too, Captain.
Have you dreamed of it, Mike?
More than that, Captain. I think I witnessed it.
Really, Mike? You think you witnessed levitation? Tell me about it.
I once saw a man appear to lift himself several feet out of his chair.
What do you mean, appear to, Mike?
Well, there was a blanket over him, and I couldn't see the space between him and his chair.
Was this some kind of carnival sideshow, magic act, or film?
No, Captain. There was no one else around, and I'm sure the man didn't know I saw him. There was no discernible reason I could see for him to be putting on an act.
What happened then, Mike?
Nothing. I was so astonished I didn't know what to do. As a stranger, I didn't want to challenge him or intrude on his privacy, so I just watched and did nothing.
Did you ever go back?
Yes, Captain. But that was the only time I ever witnessed the event. Nevertheless, I truly believe that what I saw was genuine levitation.
Mike, does this have anything to do with what you meant when you said you had something to share with me when you first arrived?
Yes, Captain.
There's more to it then, isn't there?
Yes, Captain. That man was you. You weren't dreaming. You were actually flying, just as you described your dream to me.
A long silence followed.
Well, well, a good thing I didn't try to fly too far or too high, wasn't it, Mike? Why didn't you tell me this before? And how do I know you're not putting me on? After all, you were deceptive about your identity, and there is no proof of your story.
Captain, just as I have no proof, neither do I have any reason to fabricate it. I didn't tell you before because I hoped you might eventually trust me enough to help you learn to consciously achieve your lifelong goal of flying.
Another long curtain of silence fell between them. Instead of elation, as might be expected with such incredibly good news, the captain seemed to be totally deflated. He just sat with his head bowed and his hands tightly clasped, perhaps in prayer. Mike, this just became a long day for me. I believe what you say, but I need a time out now to ponder this. I see that we can expect some weather through here this afternoon. So take the rest of the day off to get settled in your new quarters while I gather my thoughts and consider how to proceed from here. Okay?
A good idea, Captain. I'll await your call for our next meeting.
When the captain did not come to the dining room for dinner, Mike consulted Georgie.
The captain said he would have dinner in his room this evening, Mike. That's not unusual for him. He has a small kitchenette, and he keeps several pots of spaghetti and stew he made in his freezer for such times as special events in the dining room in the evening, like birthday or anniversary frivolities. I hope there's nothing wrong?
No, Georgie. We were at a point in his story where he wanted to take a break. Plus, the rain was approaching and I needed to settle in and make some notes. I'm really happy with the room and this place altogether. You do an outstanding job managing it. In case he hasn't told you so, the captain loves it here too.
That's good to hear, Mike. I mostly have to judge how we're doing by the number of complaints. It goes with the territory in this business, and I know the captain wouldn't be bashful about offering suggestions if he was unhappy with us. Like him, most of the men here achieved positions of authority in their professions. They were accustomed to being in charge, plus living in their own homes where things were done their way, so they are more than helpful on occasion.
I'm sure you get lots of rudder signals, Georgie, not to mention government regulations to deal with. Coming to a place like this may be one of the hardest adjustments a person ever has to make. I can see that it would be like being guest in a stranger's home and having nothing meaningful to do or contribute. Did you ever see the British comedy series about a retirement home, Waiting for God?
Oh, yes, Mike. We have the entire series on DVD in our library. I love it, even though it portrays the home's manager as a greedy, selfish jerk. But the folks here mostly don't care for it. They complain about the British accents being difficult to understand. But I believe the scenes simply strike nerves too close to home to be funny to them. As Garrison Keillor would say about aging, it's not for the timid. Especially now that medical science has given us a life expectancy of nearly a century. Our social systems haven't kept up, so we spend a third or more of our lives in retirement, with a 65% probability of our final 3 years in an assisted living, memory care, or nursing home. Before coming here, I worked at another retirement community operated by our parent company, which is a much grander scale facility than this one. There, they have 4 types of accommodations: 2- and 3-bedroom duplex homes, full-size apartments, smaller assisted living apartments, and nursing care rooms in what is virtually a hospital. Heritage Oaks has a single, large buffet-style dining room, which doesn't work very well for physically impaired seniors. However, there is another, smaller, sit-down dining room at the apartment building. The idea there is for seniors to begin easing into the assisted lifestyle early on, rather than wait for drastic changes later. So, those communities prefer not to take in older folks and discourage them by charging an exorbitantly high, non-refundable entry fee.
Fenceless cul-de-sac retirement communities don't appeal to me. There's too much of everyone getting in each other's face. I guess they are okay for highly gregarious people, though, who are the ones who adapt best to places like this. Like the captain, I'd rather put it off as long as possible. He was retired from the Navy in 1986, with over 30 years active service when he was only 53 years old. His father enlisted in the Army in 1924 at age 18 and retired at age 48. He passed nearly 40 years later. So both my father and grandfather spent close to half their lives in retirement. It's not easy for middle-aged band leaders and fighter pilots to begin new careers at age 50, Georgie. Fortunately, the captain saw the writing on the wall after seeing his father flounder for a while before he went into his lawnmower repair shop at Pacific Beach. So he was well prepared for retirement with lots of interests and hobbies.
Yes, Mike, the captain seems to have maintained a more positive and optimistic outlook than most folks I know. At his age, he is extremely fortunate to be as alert and healthy as he is.
Amen to that, Georgie. Naturally, I didn't know what to expect, so I am elated to find him in such good shape and with a clear memory of his past.
Indeed, Mike, though I'm sure that writing his memoirs has helped a lot with that.
Oh? He didn't mention that. He just said that he wanted to write his autobiography, but had been too busy living it.
Oh dear, Mike, I'm afraid I may have spoken out of turn, though he didn't indicate that it was not to be mentioned to anyone.
No problem, Georgie, I assure you. It makes me feel better about my identity deception. Besides, his writing has obviously made it much easier for him to tell his story, and for me to co-author it. The important thing is to get it into print. Hopefully, he will also agree to narrating it on CD or DVD.
Good idea, Mike. That would especially benefit his children and grandchildren who barely know him.
Gives him something to look forward to also, doesn't it? This project reminds me of an outstanding film, Little Big Man, starring Dustin Hoffman.
Yes, we have that in our library too. It gets shown at least once a year. I think it's also one of the captain's favorites. The situation was much the same as yours, isn't it? A reporter interviewing the very old last survivor of Custer's last stand. The best therapy there is for old folks is to find an interested ear to tell their stories to. Unfortunately, that rarely happens, so we need to encourage more seniors to write their memoirs. We have had some success with volunteer students' assistants in recording oral histories, but it takes a special talent to be accepted and to do it well. Perhaps you should consider volunteering your services with others here after finishing the captain's story.
Georgie, at the rate we are going, I'll be lucky if I live long enough to finish the captain's story.
European travels and paternal kin. Good morning, Mike. Hope I didn't call too early. I wanted to catch you before breakfast.
Not too early, Captain. I've been up for some time. Will you be having breakfast in the dining room?
Not this morning. That's why I called. I'm just having cereal and coffee here. Can we meet at the usual place about 10?
Sure, Captain. See you there.
Mike was relieved by the positive sound of his voice and arrived at their park bench ahead of the captain, but soon saw him approach down the yellow brick sidewalk, pushing his wheelchair at a good clip, using it like a walker.
Captain, you make good use of that chair.
Yeah, you should see me in Walmart with a shopping cart. I go through that place like shit through a goose. Listen, Mike, I've thought it through. First, it's a good thing that it was you to witness my flight, and that no one else knows. I have been extremely fortunate to have a number of such providential events in my life. By the way, as you will see when we get to 1969, Providence in my life is a wonderful lady named Jean. That's all I'll say about her for now. Second, knowing now that I have actually achieved levitation certainly gives new meaning to dreams come true. However, I don't see that I can do much more about it, except await my next flying dream and hope that I can progress toward a transition to consciousness without losing concentration. Your part is to keep an eye on me as we press on with this interview and hope it leads to something.
Sounds good to me, Captain. With Jean's help, I'm sure you shall succeed. Have you considered another try at returning to your childhood dream device of rolling your head back and forth on your pillow at night? It worked for you then to control your dreams. Perhaps it could work even better now that you know what is possible.
Good idea, Mike. I'll work on it. But my neck doesn't like that kind of exercise these days. I have a constant pain and restricted movement, I think caused when I relax too much on a carrier landing and my head snapped forward, aided by the weight of my helmet. Meanwhile, as I recall, we were going to talk about travels in Europe.
Right, Captain. The recorder is running.
In the summer of '50, I rode with my parents to Paris. Father was going to the Paris factory for a Selmer trumpet because they were hard to find. Paris was incredible, Mike. Unlike Venice, brochures or travel documentaries could not describe it. You simply had to go there to experience the unique atmosphere, culture, spirit, ambiance, lifestyle, or whatever it's called. For me, the most notable feature of Paris, especially after Georgia and Germany, were the gorgeous high-fashion women, fashion being braless, very low necklines, virtually down to the waist. It was a common sight to see couples kissing and hugging on street benches. Several times I saw those couples apparently meet for the first time. The scene was stark contrast to Munich, where women were typically stocky, without makeup, bundled up in drab tones of gray and brown, unshaved legs or underarms, and natural body odors in preference to perfume. The Selmer factory told Father they were making instruments for export only, so he set out to find a used one in a music shop. This occupied most of his time, leaving Mother and me on our own to tour the Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame Cathedral, museums, and art galleries. Of course, we were not spared Father's frustration and impatience with his unsuccessful trumpet search, so Mother and I retaliated as a team to make life even more difficult for him. Looking back on a photo he took of Mother and me sitting on the cement steps of a museum, pouting, Father had more of a sense of humor about it than I gave him credit for. Needless to say, since I had no time on my own, my Paris adventure was limited to day tours. Nevertheless, I was able to visit Harry's New York bar just long enough to join the International Barfly Association to get the manual, directory, and famous fly-on-a-bar lapel pin so prized by everyone at Munich High. At that time, there was an IBF bar in many major cities on the planet, but it was 20 years before I found another one, and that turned out to be an embarrassing event I'll tell about later.
I imagine the French were much friendlier to Americans following their liberation from the Nazis than they are now, Captain.
I'd say they were only less unfriendly, Mike. The French have always been so stuck on themselves they can barely stand each other. Nevertheless, Paris was the most memorable city I ever visited. Frenchmen had some justification for their superior attitude, though no excuse for their unpatriotic history, I'd say.
Where next, Captain?
My friend Pete Sell was born in China. His father was a Lutheran missionary there until the Jap invasion was imminent. "Tell it, brothers and sisters," says the preacher. "Come forward now and confess your sins to the Almighty, and all hear that you may be saved. Tell it now, brothers and sisters. Tell it." O God, I am a miserable and unworthy sinner. Yes, brother, tell it now, tell it. O Lord, I had sex with my neighbor's wife. Yes, brother, tell it, tell it. And I have sex with my neighbor's teenage daughter. Yes, brother, tell it, tell it. And I had sex with my neighbor too. Yes, 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 brother, tell it, tell it. And then I had sex with my neighbor's dog. Brother, I don't believe I would have told that.
I see a point, Captain. Why tell your readers things about you they would rather not know? On the other hand, leaving out the negatives is dishonestly one-sided, isn't it? I guess it comes down to how far you want to reach out to your readers. Perhaps your kids would be disappointed, but considering your history and family relations, why should that really matter to you now? So what was it, Captain? Tell it. Tell it. Did you have sex with Pete's dog?
That's my boy. Chip off the old block, aren't you, Mike?
Just comes natural, doesn't it?
For you, maybe, but I had to work really hard at it. I came in second place in the 1984 Asshole of the Year vote because I was not a quintessential asshole like the winner. But we'll get to that another time. To answer the question, though, no, I didn't screw Pete's dog, but you might have thought I had as far as he was concerned.
How do you feel about it now?
I wouldn't be recalling it now unless there weren't some sadness. But these are things we need to forgive ourselves and others for. There's no good in bearing baggage, is there?
Not if the learning experience was beneficial. I take it the matter didn't resolve itself between you?
No, it didn't. Soon after, Pete went to work for Radio Free Europe in Munich. Then he left for Muhlenberg College in Pennsylvania, where he had been awarded a full scholarship by an anonymous sponsor. My father was right about Pete's father being a spy, though. He returned to a Navy admiral's uniform as a director of the Office of Naval Intelligence.
Did that surprise you, Captain?
Yes, it did, Mike, on two levels. First, that my father was so sure of it without knowing any more about Pete's father than what I told him. Second, that there was nothing about the Admiral's demeanor or appearance to cause me to think he was anything more than what he said he was, an ordinary, paunchy, rosy-cheeked, middle-aged Lutheran minister doing missionary work.
I guess he was good at spying, and that's why he was an admiral?
True. One thing I enjoyed most about the Navy was the informality of plain folks dedicated to getting the job done with little regard for rank or regulations.
Surprisingly different from the perception most people have of a rigidly authoritarian Navy, isn't it?
Yes, Mike, probably because of the public images remaining from the brutal life in the days of sail.
Where next, Captain?
A few weeks after the Venice trip with Pete's family, I was on the road again with my parents, bound for Lisbon via northern France, Spain, and Portugal.
Thank you, my grandmother, very much.
El falla nada.
Good one, Captain. But how did you get by with the language the rest of the time there?
There was a man in the village in his 30s who had been raised in the U.S. and spoke English.
How did you get through it?
I'm not sure. I just mumbled and smiled and hoped my translator would fix it up for me, which I believe he did, thank goodness. I did not see the girl again.
What was life like in San Miguel?
Simple, poor, and backward. The volcanic Azores Islands, named after their soaring birds, is 1,000 miles west offshore from Europe. Except for the U.S. Air Force Base at Terceira, the Azores was largely cut off and ignored by the mainland Portuguese government. I had the feeling that the clock had been turned back at least 200 years. Few roads were paved, Few villages had electricity. Most homes were small, primitive stone cottages. The women wore black mourning shawls. Hospitals were crude. The government was oppressive, and few people were educated. Social life was largely centered around the Catholic Church and religious festivals. The people seemed to be waiting to die, a trait I noted in all Catholic rural populations, but more prominent with the Portuguese, who are said to be happy to be sad. Despite their poverty, however, people were very warm and friendly. At all the many homes we visited, we sampled their large variety of homemade wines and liquor, some very potent. By the end of the day, after making the rounds of visits, we were reeling. Father said that as a child, he always drank wine instead of water. Perhaps the wine was more sanitary than the water supply. An example of oppressive taxes was the requirement to have a license for cigarette lighters and a high tax on matches. Since there was a cigarette factory and virtually all men smoked, necessity mothered invention. Men lit their cigarettes by striking steel on flint into corn silk and blowing it into flame in their hands. The most revered and educated people in the villages were the priests. The Britannia priest I met was well respected for being social and down to earth. One told me, "The road to hell is paved with priests' heads." One day, however, I was presented to a group of 5 very young priests who were in agreement that Europe would be better off if the Nazis had won World War II.
Amazing to hear such an outrageous statement from young priests. To me, that implies approval of the Holocaust. Do you suppose they were taught that in seminary?
Possibly, but that view is not unique to Catholics. Many Europeans despised the Jews. For good reason. They feared Russia far more than the Nazis. But enough of that. Back to San Miguel. The Portuguese are known as men of the sea because so many are fishermen. But the fishing industry in the Azores was primitive. Since the islands are volcanic, the coast is steep, rocky, and open to the hostility of the Atlantic. There are few harbors. There was only one place near Britannia where small boats could be launched and recovered. Each morning, the fishermen manually maneuvered their 12-foot dinghies down a steep, narrow cliff trail to the water. 4 to 6 men rowed the boats out to sea and fished with hand lines over the side all day, and then hauled the boats and their catch back up the trail in the evening. The Azores was the last place on Earth where whales were hunted with rowed longboats and hand-thrown harpoons. While we were there, 2 14-meter sperm whales were brought in, so I went down to the factory to see them when they were hauled ashore. I had my picture taken next to one holding a large bamboo fishing pole. I have never smelled anything else nearly as strongly offensive.
Are they still whaling that way, Captain? Didn't the Save the Whale folks object?
Because it was such a dangerous profession, and so few whales were killed, Azores whaling was not on anyone's Save the Whales hit list. Nevertheless, typical of Portuguese ways, whaling went by the boards because the government failed to renew their license. My guess is that the oversight occurred because the fishermen could not pay the required bribe. As in many third world countries, government workers in the Azores were not paid living wages, and it was understood that tips were the common form of subsidy. Today, all that remains of the Azores whaling industry is a museum in Fayal.
No doubt not missed by the men who risked their lives going down to the sea in longboats after them. You mentioned volcanoes. Are any still active?
Yes, but on a relatively small scale. In the early 50s, one erupted on Fayal, which evacuated the island for a short time. The result was a modest expansion of the shoreline. There is a region on San Miguel Island where the ground is so warm that the vegetation is tropical and the ponds and streams are quite hot. The locals bake some meals by burying them underground. However, there have been no active eruptions there in modern history.
Sounds like a catastrophe waiting to happen.
Perhaps, but less certain than the floods, fires, mudslides, and earthquakes of California. And there has been no mass exodus of the West Coast.
Is there anything more you'd like to say about that Azores visit?
Just that the greatest benefit to me was meeting my grandmother Alexandra. What a magnificently outstanding lady. She was strong, intelligent, kind, and loving, even in her 90s. On the other hand, the most inexplicable aspect of the visit was Father's benign disregard for her. It was a long time later before I came to understand the Portuguese psyche, which also gave me insight into myself. But we'll get to that, Mike. There's a lot of Portuguese in you, too. So let's end this chapter here.
Okay, Captain, as you wish. May I join you for dinner?
Of course, I'll meet you there. Albuquerque. In July 1952, with Navy orders to the University of New Mexico, I returned to the U.S. with my parents. Shall we pick up the story there, Mike?
Sure, Captain. The recorder is running.
Our flight to New York from Frankfurt, aboard a Flying Tigers chartered C-54, was memorable. We were routed via Ireland, but diverted to the Azores because of weather. The airplane was packed with soldiers and dependents. The lone stewardess had more than she could handle, with kids crying and running up and down the aisles. We were well out over the Atlantic when a fat tech sergeant who insisted on smoking cigars called out loud enough for everyone on the plane to hear, "Stewardess, stewardess, come here. Look out on the right wing. There's oil all over it coming from number 4 engine." Naturally, it became deadly quiet in the cabin as the stewardess looked out to confirm. Still loud enough for everyone to hear, the fat sergeant demanded, "Why didn't they fix that before we took off?" That was the last straw for the overworked and harassed stewardess. She stood up with her hands on her hips and snapped back, "Sergeant, if they kept this plane on the ground for everything that's wrong with it, we never would get in the air." And she stormed up the aisle to the cockpit. When she returned to the cabin, she sat on the arm of a front chair and put her head on her arm on the top of the headrest until we landed at Santa Maria, Azores. All remained still in the cabin. After landing, it was announced that we would stay overnight for an engine change. The next morning, the word quickly went around that the Air Force had refused to give the Flying Tigers an engine. So we reboarded and took off for Newfoundland anyhow, with new oil all over the right wing as before. We arrived at Newfoundland at night in a hellacious thunderstorm to refuel and re-oil the leaky engine, and then took off right back into more thunderstorms for the rest of the night into New York City. I had the window seat directly behind Father and could see that he was perspiring nervously. The turbulence kept everyone buckled to their seats. Frequent flashes of lightning made it appear that the propellers were stopped. Oh boy, I thought. Here's my chance to get even for the time in Portland when Father tried to scare me about flying. "Look, Dad, both engines on our side have quit. I wonder if the other ones quit too." Father just froze and didn't say anything, but I could see his collar soaking in sweat. I wasn't the only coward in the family after all. Sweet revenge. Thank you, God.
Weren't you frightened too, Captain?
No, I was fascinated. I finally had the chance to see night thunderstorms from inside, between, and above them. Mother wasn't scared either. She was always fearless. We had Father's number.
See, Captain, there was some compensation in having a father around after all, wasn't there?
I suppose so, if you look at it from the dark side. Anyhow, this trip was to be the last of my time at home. Father had orders to the Army band in D.C., but didn't want to be in such a high-profile job. Somehow he was successful in getting his orders changed to Fort Carson, Colorado Springs. On the drive west, we diverted to Columbus, Georgia for a few days to put our home up for sale. So of course I called Elaine. She drove right over to pick me up in her shiny new black Buick sedan and handed me the keys. She had matured a lot and looked great. We drove around to visit our old gang. Now, charming, graceful, and self-confident, Elaine outshone all those who had considered her dumb and awkward. Her parents had set her up in business with her own maternity boutique across the Chattahoochee River in Phoenix City, Alabama, and she was obviously doing very well. We also stopped at the Baker Village shop to say hello to her mother, who made it clear that she was not happy to see me back in town. That mattered little to Elaine. She was very glad to see me. I sensed that we could easily pick up where we left off. However, I felt compelled to tell her about Oralee, and there was no kissing or touching. She said that she had been engaged too, but ended wedding plans when she found she couldn't go through with it. Nevertheless, to my astonishment, Elaine announced that she would move to Albuquerque too. At this point, Mike, I should have taken more interest in the distinction between Elaine and Oralee. Though it meant a 4-year separation, and despite my protests, Oralee chose to be an English major at the University of Vermont. Elaine, on the other hand, after a 3.5-year separation, with no expectation of ever seeing me again, plus knowing I was engaged now, was ready to leave her home and business to move to Albuquerque to be with me.
What happened, Captain?
Nothing. I never wrote to Elaine or heard of her again. Out of loyalty to Oralee, I told myself.
Ever regret it, Captain?
Not really, Mike. Though I certainly retained fond feelings for Elaine and thought of her many times over the years. I believe that my nostalgia had more to do with lost innocence than love. After all, we grew up together through adolescence in a very successfully intimate way that I could never recapture with others. In retrospect, I see that Elaine was smarter than me in recognizing that was love. Perhaps I was blind to my own feelings. But that's the way it is with boys, isn't it?
Yes, Captain. Some would call it immaturity, but women say that all men are out of touch with their feelings.
Yes, Mike, I like the way a recently divorced actress once put it. Sure, women can fake orgasms, but men can fake whole relationships.
Next stop, Albuquerque, Captain?
Yes, Mike, as we drove west through Texas and into New Mexico, I had a growing sinking feeling. As we descended from the Sandia Mountains on Route 66 east of Albuquerque, it looked like we had landed on the moon. It was a clear, dry day with unlimited visibility to the horizon 100 miles west, without a tree or hill or any sign of life, just desert sand and sagebrush. Yet the road sign said Albuquerque was only 15 miles away. We knew that Route 66 ran straight through the middle of it, and we could see the road on the western horizon. But there was no city. As we approached, we began seeing a few run-down gas stations, motels, gift shops advertising Indian turquoise jewelry, and a rattlesnake zoo. Nothing was said. We were totally speechless until Mother finally began laughing. Father and I joined in, but it was one of those laughing spells which comes from believing that nothing could be this bad. Finally, we saw that the reason we hadn't seen Albuquerque was that it was hidden in the valley of the mile-wide and a foot-deep Rio Grande River. As we drove into town, it was more of the same type of businesses we had seen approaching, just more of them. It was apparent the entire city was stretched out along Route 66 and was literally little more than a wide place in the road. The last straw was driving onto the university campus. Instead of an ivy-covered community of scholars, the damn place looked like what I imagined a Navajo reservation would be. All the buildings were mud huts. Yeah, I know, Mike, adobe. How quaint. A big lump formed in my throat. Mother cried. She told me later that she cried all the way to Colorado Springs to have left me in such a dismal place. As excited as I was to be moving forward, I remembered how beautiful Bavaria was and what a great time that had been in my life. I missed Germany. Sorry, Mike. I know that it's your hometown I'm running down, and I know how it has changed into a much wider place in the road since the 50s, but it's still no place I would choose to live.
I don't get it, Captain. Everything was going your way just as you always hoped. You were far away from home on a full scholarship, sailing smoothly on toward a degree, a Navy commission, and flight training. You had it all in the palm of your hand. What was missing?
Quite right, Mike. I had no legitimate reason to complain. I simply felt depressingly lost and out of place. Germany had been so good, nothing could follow it. There, I was with a close group of classmates I loved, and I was socially successful. I had lettered in sports, elected president of the student council, and declared the Duke of Harlaching. I had been raised above the self I had been before by wonderful people in a grand environment. In Munich, I was a big fish in a perfect little pond. For certain, there was no hope for that in Albuquerque, where I was doomed to remain a small fry in a very unattractive big desert.
How did you cope with it then?
I worked. Not at academics, where I did poorly, barely keeping my head above water, but at a series of part-time jobs.
Why did you work? Didn't the scholarship include tuition, books, and fees, plus $50 a month?
Yes, Mike, but it wasn't enough. My parents had to send $80 a month to cover my room and board. I was not happy to still be dependent on them.
What jobs did you have?
The first semester I lived in the dormitory, a zoo with no chance to study amidst the calamity. The only good thing was that my roommate, Ernie Suazo, introduced me to Spanish culture and, against his will, to your mother.
Against his will?
Ernie and I were at the campus bookstore when my breath was blown away by one of the most beautiful women I had ever seen. She was in tight jeans and a turquoise sweater, silver belt, long black hair, and flashing dark eyes. Ernie knew her and spoke to her, but he didn't introduce me. Later, I asked Ernie to arrange an introduction, but he was reluctant. You don't want to know her, Manny. She is bad news. He refused to elaborate, but I persisted until Ernie finally included me in a family home social event with Emma Rodriguez attending. We dated on and off for the next 3 years, but she allowed little more intimacy than kissing, even though we sometimes spent the night at her apartment. My old karma in relationships remained unchanged. Just as well, I thought. I was being loyal to Orally and avoiding risks which could upset the future. As an NROTC midshipman, I was subject to the same regulations as the Naval Academy midshipman. Marriage or pregnancy was a Class A offense with mandatory expulsion.
Ah, I see where this is leading, Captain. But what was Ernie warning you against?
He never said more than that Emma had once run away to be married. Her parents had them arrested on their wedding night and had the marriage annulled, so I assumed she was underage. I never raised the subject further with Emma, and she didn't offer the story, but she did admit to a prior marriage in the paperwork for ours. Perhaps you can elaborate?
This is news to me, Captain. I know nothing about it. But it says something about your relationship that you didn't discuss it, doesn't it?
What it says is that we were not very close.
Then why did you go on seeing each other for 3 years?
Good question, Mike. I can't speak for Emma. She was mysteriously exotic. I understood she was artistically gifted as a dancer and singer on stage, but I only saw impromptu dances at her apartment. She said she was a part-time UNM student, but I didn't see evidence of that. I do know that she was working for an attorney. I enjoyed being with Emma because she was bright and eccentric. Mostly I enjoyed her company and introduction to Albuquerque's Spanish culture. Castilian Spanish, she said, I suppose to distinguish herself from being Mexican or Indian. Not that it mattered to me. The warm social gatherings of families and friends were uniquely special to me. Toddlers to grandparents contributed to the entertainment with songs, dances, or poetry. It was a great getaway from superficial campus fraternity life into the kind of genuine warmth I had felt in the Azores. I was surprised to discover, however, that there were strong prejudices on both sides between Hispanics and Anglos in Albuquerque. I had never thought of myself as Hispanic, nor experienced any kind of bias. I discovered that I was passing as either Hispanic or Anglo without being either one.
Weren't you a fraternity member, Captain?
Yes, Ernie and I went through fraternity rush, just to confirm our negative attitudes against them. But to my surprise, the Kappa Sigmas were different. Many of the members were Korean War veterans and football players. The atmosphere was genuinely informal and friendly, without the phony social attitudes of the other houses. In any event, they were better than the chaos at the dorm, so I applied. I thought Ernie had also, but that didn't happen, so I rarely saw him again. Much later, I learned he had been blackballed because he was Hispanic, and that I would have been as well, except that someone checked with the registrar to find out where I was from. I was okay. I was from Germany.
How did you feel about that, Captain?
I have little respect for fraternities. I learned that in those days, most fraternities and sororities, including Kappa Sigma, also had membership restrictions against blacks and Jews written into their constitutions. I believe the restriction against Hispanics was an informal Southwest add-on. In the early 50s, Congress passed a law against racial or religious membership restrictions in private organizations or public facilities. Even so, there were no blacks, Jews, or Hispanics in our chapter.
Did you go along with that, Captain?
As a matter of fact, no. When I left the chapter, it was headed for its financial demise and is no longer on the UNM campus. I never heard or asked what happened. Next time I visited, 1969, it was a vacant lot.
What are your feelings about that now? Were there no bright spots in fraternity life?
Actually, yes, Mike, it's good you asked. I don't mean to be totally negative. Our initiation was a memorable hoot indeed.
Very clever. What other fun and games were there?
There were several ingenious winner-gets-a-prize competitions.
Good grief. What did the sorority sisters do for initiation fun?
I have no idea, but it does spark one's imagination to consider their relay races, doesn't it?
Who knows? They might really brand me this time. What were fraternity social functions like?
Equally inventive. We had BYOB, pan parties, at the Rio Grande.
Sounds like fun. What jobs did you have?
Well, let's see. First, I was a houseboy at the Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority house.
I'm surprised, Captain. From what I know, you rarely passed up such opportunities. So what was your academic experience like at UNM?
Bad start. I had enhanced my Navy scholarship application.
So you switched majors then?
No, I struggled through the rest of the second semester. I was overjoyed to discover that all of my credits from Maryland, I'd just gone from being a freshman to a senior.
But why psychology instead of another major, Captain? Why not? Psychology was relatively easy and interesting. There are greater benefits to higher education than job training, aren't there?
Yes, indeed, life enrichment and disciplined thinking among them. Speaking of the Navy, what was the NROTC program like? Academically, we took a professional development course each semester. Beyond that, the North unit was much like a fraternity, only better, I thought. My best friends at UNM were fellow midshipmen, Dave Sanchez and Max Sloan.
If I have the dates right, Captain, you graduated in June 1955, 5 months before I was born. So you were at UNM only 3 years instead of 4. Why didn't you use all of the Navy scholarship?
You have the dates right, Mike. No, I did not use the 4th year of the scholarship. My favorite professor, Dr. Keston, who taught all the child psych courses. There were several reasons. First, I would have had to take statistics courses. Third, Aurelie was graduating. Most of all, I just wanted to get the hell out of town. I was simply sick of school and Albuquerque.
Was I a factor in that last reason, Captain?
No, Mike, my mind was made up the year before.
Didn't you see Aurelie at all during those 3 years?
Very little, Mike. It's a long drive from New Mexico to Vermont.
Your cop karma wasn't working very well in those days, was it?
We sustained the relationship on the strong bond we developed in the 3 years in Germany.
Didn't Aurelie visit you in Albuquerque?
No, Mike. Presumably money was the obstacle. Still, it was a sore subject. Prolonged absences do not make the heart grow fonder, as we later discovered.
Didn't you see your parents at all while you were at UNM?
Oh, sure. I drove to Colorado Springs for holidays, but Mother was working at the Post Exchange, and they lived in a small 2-room apartment, so I didn't see much of them and slept on the living room couch. 2 of the trips were memorable, however. One of my frat brothers, Bill Thompson, was from Pueblo, 40 miles south of Colorado Springs, so I sometimes drove with him. There were 4 of us in a beat-up Ford going home for Christmas '53 when one of the water pumps sprang a leak. The garages were already closed for the weekend, but we were able to get the owner of an auto parts store to sell us a pump, which we had to change ourselves. The 2 water pumps on flathead Ford V8s were also engine mounts, so there was lots of grunting and cursing required to change one. In the process, we lost all the antifreeze, and the temperature was forecast to go well below 0 on our route through Raton Pass. But we figured we would be okay as long as we kept the engine running. In the long climb up the pass, however, the engine got very hot. We assumed that the new pump was leaking, so lacking other available fluids, we all peed into the radiator, to no avail. What we failed to realize was that the water in the radiator had frozen, which stopped circulation to the engine, so it was steaming hot. The engine finally quit altogether, and we were stuck near the summit of Raton Pass at 1 a.m. with no traffic and temperatures which froze local thermometers at 40 below zero. Our only hope was to bundle up as much as possible inside the car and hope for the best. Fortunately, several hours later, a Good Samaritan stopped and gave us all a ride to Pueblo. Another trip was even more eventful. My roommate, Bob Bogan, had a 1932 Model B Roadster hot rod, which his girlfriend refused to ride in. So Bob and I bought a 1940 Plymouth two-door sedan, and I got to drive the Roadster a lot, including one spring break trip home alone. It was 1 a.m. on the road between Pueblo with no traffic when I saw the headlights of a car pull onto the highway behind me and close the distance very rapidly to dangerously close behind me, and just stayed there. My speedometer wasn't working, so I was guessing speed with the tachometer. I could probably have outrun the bastard, but something told me to just hold the 3,300 revolutions per minute I had been cruising at. Finally, the car shot past me, and I saw that it was a state trooper. Not long afterward, I saw the headlights pull out again, and the event repeated 3 times before the cop gave up on me. I got home about 2 a.m. When I got up, the news was all about a state trooper who was shot 3 times and killed at about 1:30 a.m. on the Pueblo, Colorado Springs highway. There was only one witness who said he saw the cop on the side of the road behind an old convertible with a young male in a leather jacket in the cop's passenger seat and the interior lights on. I fit the description. Later, since my parents weren't home, I decided to go for a ride on the same route north toward Denver. A short way out of town, however, I saw a police roadblock ahead. There I was in a leather jacket, driving an old convertible, and had been on the road from Pueblo when the cop was shot. So I stupidly whipped a U-turn across the median and sped off south. Fortunately, I got away with it. Otherwise, God knows my picture would have been on the front page of every newspaper, and the evening TV news would have had film of me in handcuffs being led away to jail, and who knows what after that. They never did catch the killer, so I would have been the only suspect.
How fortunate for you, Captain. Someone was surely watching over you that time.
That time and many others, Mike.
You have mentioned the Navy summer cruises. What were those like?
My 1953 summer cruise was aboard Shannon, a destroyer converted to a mine layer, home-ported in Norfolk, Virginia. There were over 100 of us mids aboard. Half were fourth class, the others first class, that is, freshmen and seniors. Also, half of us were NROTC, the rest were Naval Academy. The Naval Academy mids were tightly bonded and naturally looked down their noses at us amateur sailors. They knew how to spit-shine shoes. We all displaced the lower-rank sailors, so of course we lived and worked like them, bunked 2 feet apart in hot, cramped compartments. Standing 2 separate 4-hour watches a day as helmsmen, bridge lookouts, boiler and engine rooms, etc., we were otherwise occupied with scrubbing, mopping, and chipping paint, or conducting drills. There was precious little spare time and no place to hide. The officers, including the captain, were aloof and kept their distance from us and the hostile crew. Much of the crew appeared to be waterfront rats who enjoyed taunting us. For example, several petty officers in the engine room had fun grossing us out by displaying their advanced cases of venereal diseases and dwelling on the morbid details of their disgusting sex lives. It was not a happy ship by any means. We were bound for Brazil and Trinidad in company with the carrier Saipan, cruiser Macon, and several other destroyers. Getting there, of course, meant crossing the equator and all the traditional fun and games accompanying initiation of polywogs in ceremonies conducted by the shellbacks. For this cruise, that meant we could expect some serious physical abuse by the crew, who were all shellbacks, reveling in the opportunity to dish it out to us lower than the lowest layer of whale shit on the ocean floor future officers. In preparation, the shellbacks rigged a framework on the gun deck to support a canvas-lined pool with a high platform attached, as well as other ominous-looking torture devices. We polywogs decided that the best defense was an offense, and 3 days before crossing, we revolted. Some enterprising polywog poured acid in the pool, which burned large holes in the canvas. Then we stormed the gun deck to tear down the structures, which resulted in some hand-to-hand engagements, ending when 3-inch fire hoses were turned on us. One mid broke an arm when he was blasted off the gun deck to the main deck. Similar revolts were taking place on the other ships, and one polywog was lost overboard. This was serious stuff, Mike, and it got worse. The shellbacks finally put down our rebellion the day before crossing. All us polywogs were corralled into the mess hall, with the lights and ventilation turned off, wearing just our underwear. The next day, the ceremonies began by taking us out of the mess hall, one at a time, blindfolded, crawling on hands and knees on the steel decks, with shocks administered by a bare electrical wire to ensure submissiveness, before being forced to crawl through several 2x6 bottomless canvas laundry bags sewn together to make a tunnel lined with fuel oil and garbage. To speed us on our way, shellbacks beat us with 4-foot lengths of flat 3-inch fire hose, shillelaghs soaked in seawater with nicely cord-bound handles. From the tunnel, each polywog was led to the royal court, commanded by King Neptune himself and his queen, to face charges of grave misconduct and sentencing of punishment. Also present at court was Davy Jones and the royal baby, who was the fattest, hairiest, ugliest, and grossest boiler room sailor aboard, dressed only in a diaper. Homage to the court was paid by each polywog by kissing the royal baby's fat, hairy, greasy, bare belly several times with a helping shove to the back of the head. Amazingly, all our revolt damage had been repaired, so the next station was in the stool at the top of the 10-foot tower above the pool filled with fuel oil and garbage. Each polywog was pushed backward off the stool into the pool and then led to the royal dentist chair, where the royal medicine was administered down the polywog's throat with a grease gun. The royal medicine was a masterful concoction designed to cause projectile vomiting. Polywogs were then led to another chair to be administered the royal antidote by the same means and with similar violent results. After more tunnel crawling and other stations I can't recall, the last obstacle was running the gauntlet down the line of shellbacks, swinging fire hose shillelaghs before being washed down with fire hoses to clear away the oil, garbage, blood, and tattered remains of underwear.
Good God, Captain. Does the Navy still permit that?
Well, they still were in 1971 aboard the carrier America when we sailed from Cuba via Brazil, Cape Horn, and Australia to Vietnam, and then across the equator again, going the rest of the way around the world, coming home. Thank God I had already done it. With the vast expanse of flight deck and more than 6,000 sailors aboard, imagine what running the gauntlet was like for the polywogs on that cruise.
How do you prove that you are a shellback, not a polywog? Do they just take your word for it?
Lord, no. An official entry of the crossing is made in each shellback's Navy service record. Plus, he is presented an 8x10 certificate from the domain of Neptunus Rex for framing, as well as a wallet-sized replica. Anyone who could not provide absolute shellback proof was assumed to be a polywog and made to go through the initiation again. I carried my shellback card in my wallet for 30 years.
For good reason. That's the most brutal ceremonial naval tradition I have ever heard of. What do they do aboard cruise ships?
It varies, but I believe the ceremony is little more than a cute costume party in the ballroom.
How do the merchant ships conduct the ceremony?
I don't know, Mike. There aren't many crew members aboard merchant ships, and most have crossed many times. Still, given their usual multinational mix of waterfront rats, I imagine that some polywogs get worked over in some grisly ways best not contemplated. At any rate, only Navy shellback records will get you out of doing it the Navy way.
What was Brazil like in 1953?
A mixed bag. We were the first U.S. Navy ships to visit in 11 years, and we were told we might not be welcome because of communist leanings and anti-U.S. sentiments. Half the task group went to the capital, Rio de Janeiro, with the carrier Saipan, and we went to Sao Paulo, Brazil's largest city. I'm glad to say that the natives were friendly. I met a tall, gracious, and lovely young lady at a command performance embassy reception who was coincidentally named Maria Rodriguez. She spoke not a word of English, nor I Portuguese. We dated very properly all 10 days in port, and I even met her parents. But the only advanced conversations we had were when we encountered my pal Dave Sanchez, who did his best translating for us with his Spanish. After touring Maria aboard Shannon, one of the chief petty officers told me that she was the most beautiful Brazilian girl he had seen, a very high compliment considering the competition. In Dave's translation of our final conversation, Maria declared her intention to visit me in Albuquerque. I didn't take it lightly since her family approved and appeared to have the means to send her.
What came of that, Captain?
We exchanged English-Portuguese letters with Dave's translations for several months. But when she confirmed her intention to visit with proposed dates, I backed off. It was going to be way too complicated, expensive, and time-consuming for me to host her properly. Plus, for her and her parents, it would probably mean we were engaged if we weren't already. So I put off responding with polite regrets and never heard from her again.
I guess that episode was similar in some ways to being presented with the young lady during your Azores visit.
Exactly. Good training. While Portuguese romancing may advance slowly, it seemed that wedding plans proceeded at light speed. Scary business, Mike. As I was to learn the hard way, the Spanish culture can be similar.
So how did the old world Portuguese match with the Brazilians?
From my perspective now, having visited Brazil 3 times, compared with 4 visits to the Azores and a year living in Portugal, and despite the fact that most of the Brazilian Portuguese descended from the Azores, my impression is that there is little similarity between Brazilians and other Portuguese. The traditional cultural and religious constraints imposed in the Old World vanished and went to the opposite extreme in Brazil. Rio's Ipanema Beach and Carnival are about as free and far removed from Old World Catholicism and the traditionally happy to be sad Portuguese image as it is possible to get.
Are you saying that the Brazilians tend to be less moral by comparison?
Not really, just freer from artificial constraints. Underneath, I think most people want to have morally decent lives. The beaches and carnivals can give an exaggerated impression, whereas daily lives are conventional. For example, the first night ashore, Dave and I went to a bar where there were several single girls who appeared to be prostitutes. One of our shipmate midshipmen was sitting with one until the girl erupted emotionally and drove the midshipman away from her table. He came over to sit with us, confirming that she was a prostitute, and confessed that he had insulted her. We could see that she was shedding tears. Finally, the mid, feeling very remorseful, returned to her table and apologized profusely. When we sailed out of Sao Paulo, I saw her on the dock crying and waving her handkerchief to that midshipman. What he and I learned, and I saw in all countries outside the U.S., is that prostitution is a socially accepted profession, sometimes even honored as geishas are, and that those women, like all others, deserve to be treated with respect, whether or not you use or approve of their services. I'm reminded of a great line in an old movie you may recall. The story was about a socialite who is attracted to a professional assassin who only sleeps with prostitutes. So she poses as one to get him to bed. The next day at lunch, she asks her older and wiser girlfriend why such a man would only date prostitutes. Her friend replies, "Because he knows what their price is. He doesn't know what our price is."
Are you suggesting that all women set a price for sex, Captain?
To some degree, yes, but that's not as cynical as it may sound. Some Eastern cultures place very low value on women and allow no opportunities outside of marriage except prostitution. In general, Western women are much more practical about taking advantage of supply and demand. Most often in women's marriage decisions, security is the price. After all, raising children requires it. So, women need a reason, but men only need a place. We suffer from a flaw in God's design, which gave us a mind and a penis, but the blood supply to operate only one of them at a time.
Too true, I fear. Pitiful, isn't it? So, where to next? Trinidad, wasn't it?
Ah yes, Trinidad is a beautiful, lush, tropical, mountainous island in the West Indies, off the coast of Venezuela, and at that time was still a British colony. Port of Spain, the capital, was the most colorful contrast to any place I had been. Populated mostly by black descendants of slaves, plus American Indians and East Indians, Trinidad is the home of calypso music, steel drums, and limbo dancing, which were in their prime then. Max, David, and I went ashore mid-morning with bathing suits under our uniforms intending to go to the beach. On the way, however, we stopped at a cabaret and had a 15-cent rum and Coca-Cola, and another, and then another. The only other customer was the youthful remains of an expatriate American who appeared to have spent the night on the floor, semi-revived for more debauchery. He was dancing with one of the bar girls to the calypso music of a three-piece band. On my third rum and coke before noon, I could easily see myself as the wasted American if I stayed in Trinidad a week. During a break, the guitarist singer came to our table and sang verses describing each of us to a T. It was dinner time when we left. So much for the beach. After a fine Indian meal, we followed the sounds of a steel band to another cabaret where the bar girl waitresses were taking turns dancing under the limbo pole with a very thin guy who must have been nearly 7 feet tall. More rum and cokes. The mood was magic. Several sailors ventured onto the floor and did the Navy proud with their performance. 3 of the girls came to our table and stood behind us, rubbing our shoulders. The girl behind me explained that though she was heavy, that was a good thing, because the fat made her tighter, and she offered to satisfy me for $5. Then she ran her left hand down my chest to my crotch, where she was visibly shocked to find no trace of manhood, which had been well compressed by my tight bathing suit. As she stood back, she said that if I could satisfy her, she would give me $5. Thus ended my closest encounter with a black girl. Not so for the sailors, though. Even for the deep Southerners, the color barrier quickly dissolved.
Different attitudes and different latitudes, Captain.
Exactly right. Even in the 50s, the differences were socially artificial. They always were, as we have learned more about the lives and loves of folks like Thomas Jefferson.
So, was that the extent of your romantic adventures in Trinidad?
Not quite. The 3 of us returned to the Indian restaurant for lunch on the following day. 3 attractive Indian girls were there, so I invited them to join us, and I introduced us as Tom, Dick, and Harry. Since they were married and just having a girls' day out, it was all quite innocent, until one of the girls said her husband was traveling off the island, so if I came to her house the next day for lunch, she would cook me a real Indian meal. I accepted with every intention of going, but thought better of it after sleeping on it.
Excuse me for saying so, Captain, but you were a 21-year-old cherry boy. Either you were in masterful control, or you were pretty damn shy.
Just shy, I think. One of my exes teased me about being a monk in a previous life. Maybe so. I have always been fascinated by Gregorian chants. Still, I truly loved women and wanted nothing more than a close, loving, and lasting relationship. I just couldn't loosen up for one-night stands with strangers, and I was wary of getting girls I cared about into trouble. Foremost, I meant to observe at least one of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery.
It sounds more like you were just scared, Captain.
Have it your way, Mike. You may be right. Whatever the reason, as I said before, I felt that door would lead me to leaving behind important hopes and dreams of the future. I was correct.
Okay, we covered the ports. How was the rest of that cruise?
Awful. Without dwelling on it, it was by far the most negative Navy experience I ever had. The foul nature of the crew was exacerbated by the attitude of the officers. Life at sea aboard Shannon was miserable. Destroyers never stop rolling, even in calm seas. So you have to hang on to something every step or risk injury on slippery decks. There were long lines for awful meals with an extreme shortage of silverware. So you had to take the dirty silver from a man leaving the table or eat with your hands. A deep dislike developed between the equally numbered Naval Academy and NROTC midshipmen. One day, when we were all together in the cramped crew's compartment below decks, we got word that the entire University of Oklahoma sophomore class of 40 midshipmen had been killed in a Navy plane crash. One of the Naval Academy mids was overheard by an Oklahoma mid to make the extremely distasteful observation, "Well, we all move up 40 numbers." There was very nearly a full-blown riot, and it might have been better if we had cleared the air with one, for the bitterness did not diminish. Everything went sour as we were enveloped in hostility toward each other and the Navy. Another mid and I intentionally disgusted the rest of the mids by generating a phony discussion and survey of heterosexual oral sex, an unacceptable topic in those days. One of my jobs was first loader on a 4-gun 40mm mount, which meant feeding 30 pounds of 4-round clips into a cannon firing at a rate of about 2 rounds a second, which caused me to jump a foot every time it fired. Once during gunnery, practice with live ammunition firing 5-inch guns and 40mm anti-aircraft guns at a target sleeve towed by an airplane, we were steaming downwind at the speed of the wind, so gun smoke enveloped the ship and obscured the target from our view. Controlling the radar gun director, a first-class mid called for a ceasefire to wait for the smoke to clear. But in his zeal to commence firing again, he prematurely locked the gun director onto the tow plane, and a number of rounds were fired at it before ceasing. Several rounds exploded near the tail of the tow plane, fortunately without damage or injury.
The captain must have nearly dirtied his pants at the prospect of losing his command, as he saw a mid shoot at a tow plane.
No doubt, but he surely would not have been missed by anyone aboard. He was a lousy officer and ship handler. To cap off the cruise, he stopped the ship dead in the water 50 feet from the dock, and we had to haul it in by hand. I wasn't going to be missed either. In part as the result of our sex survey, I was ranked last in aptitude by my peer midshipmen. So in 6 weeks, I went from number 1 in my class to dead bottom. Good for me. Screw the Navy.
Kind of makes me wonder how you made it in the Navy, Captain.
Me too, Mike, and you ain't heard nothing yet, though that cruise was the low point in my attitude. Father once told me that I was too rebellious to succeed in the military. Fortunately, however, naval aviation was more forgiving of leadership styles than the Army or Air Force was. I damn sure would not have succeeded as a black shoe destroyer sailor.
I can see why you ended up loving the Navy so much then. Your second cruise was better?
Yes, for the second-class cruise, our 6 weeks was split between amphibious warfare orientation in Norfolk, Virginia, and aviation indoctrination at Corpus Christi, Texas. There was little worth noting, except that I got to drive a landing craft and had my first ride in a Navy single-engine SNJ trainer, similar to what I first flew in flight training. One day at the Corpus Navy Exchange, Dave and I found a baby skunk, all wet and abandoned in the bushes. Since it was too young to odorize us, we took it back to the barracks, dried it off, and gave it some water. We decided to try to keep it as a pet, so we took it to a veterinarian in a shoebox to have it deodorized. On the way, however, we noted that our little flower friend had begun to develop that capacity. Since it was Saturday, the vet put our flower in an outside cage. When we called Monday, the vet said that Flower had passed away. We believed, however, that Flower bought himself a ticket to heaven by fully developing his defensive mechanism over that weekend.
Too bad. I've heard that skunks make good pets. and they are cute little critters. So that brings us to your last cruise?
Yes, Mike, but first I need to back up to early that year to tell about your mother and me. I will keep the account as factual as I can recall, without vindictiveness. I hope that you can accept that I'm relating this only because it's an event in my life and others too consequential to pass over lightly. For you, some of this may be in the category of, I don't believe I'd have told that. We can delete later, but I want to tell it all to you this time. Plus, there were repercussions to others besides you, your mother, and me.
Understood, Captain. I'll do my best to stick to my role as a reporter and separate personal reactions.
Okay, I'll hold you to that. I hadn't seen Emma for months because of her barriers to intimacy. It was just too frustrating for me to spend the night fully clothed with her, with little more than kissing permitted, and the balance of our relationship did not compensate. So, I was very surprised one Saturday afternoon at the house when I was told there was a girl out front who wanted to see me. There she was, long wavy black hair, tight white sweater, and riding jodhpurs breathtakingly gorgeous. After driving a while in her car, I asked where she wanted to go. I was stunned when she said to a motel. There was little doubt what was coming, but I chose to go along, one step at a time. What man can ever understand what goes through a woman's mind when she makes these decisions? In the motel, barriers were lowered, and whatever doubt I had about the extent of her intentions were quickly extinguished. Everything was happening way too fast for me. After all, this was to be my first time. Obviously, I was not her first. I panicked and told her I couldn't go through with it because, as she already knew, I was engaged to Aurelie and I was not in love with her. It was a bad scene, Mike. Emma collapsed in tears, humiliated. You know how women's tears work on us. I felt like a complete jerk. So I apologized profusely and tried my best to console her. In my view then, when a woman sincerely offers her body, it is a kind of sacred act which no man should reject cruelly. That's how naive I was. My consoling worked too well, however. Things heated up to the point where the main event was imminent. There was just one stipulation by Emma. I had to promise not to pull out. It had something to do with her being Catholic, but at that point I agreed. Afterward, I was remorseful and fearful of the possible consequences. A few weeks later, I flew to Denver to take the Navy's aviation flight aptitude test and physical exam. I had two concerns. First, my high blood pressure history. Because the Army said it was just a nervous reaction to having it taken, I had daily readings done at the campus clinic to accustom myself to it. It worked. My pressure dropped to a consistent 110 for years after, but I couldn't be sure how I would react in this all-important examination. Secondly, I wasn't sure of my eyesight. I had worn glasses for several years in Georgia. There was no remaining problem I knew about. Still, there was cause for concern. Pondering the possibilities during the flight to Denver, I had my third imaginary conversation with God. Is flying still the most important goal of your life? He asked. Yes, it is, I replied. Would you sacrifice anything for it? He asked. Anything, I said. Would you give up Aurelie? He asked. That stopped me for a minute before I replied, yes.
Wow, God asked you hard questions, didn't he? First your life, and then Aurelie. What happened?
Everything went well in Denver. No problem with my eyes or heart, and I had their first ever perfect score on the flight aptitude test. At that time, Navy's test developed during World War II, was the most accurate job aptitude test ever devised.
Great, so you're on your way to flight training. Home free.
Not quite, Mike. When I got home, Emma came bouncing up to me with a broad smile and announced, "Guess what, Manuel? I'm pregnant."
So God was having you make good on your choice, wasn't he?
No doubt, Mike. That would surely end my relationship with Aurelie. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Emma wanted to get married immediately, supposedly just to legally legitimize the birth. I explained that I could not be married until I was commissioned in September following my final summer Navy cruise, or I would be tossed out of the NROTC program and lose my entire Navy future. Emma wouldn't hear of postponing the wedding. Figuring that I would put it off and skip out on her after the cruise, Emma reported me to the Dean of Men, and I was called into his office. Although the dean had no authority in such matters, I was lectured on doing the honorable thing. That wasn't so bad, but Emma's next act was a call to my parents to be the first to tell them they were going to be grandparents. The first I knew of the call was when Father showed up to intervene. After meeting Emma, his advice to me was to marry her and move in with her, and then tell Navy about it during the cruise before I was commissioned. He also advised me to tell Aurelie goodbye and never see her again. Otherwise, she would make me suffer for it the rest of my life with her. Next, Emma threatened to report me to the CO of the NROTC with the attorney she worked for in tow. She was going for the throat and didn't give a damn about the consequences. The only concession she made was a promise that her attorney would take care of the divorce following the birth free of charge, no strings attached. Her only purpose, she insisted, was a legitimate name for the child. There was no realistic choice left. I was in a corner with no practical option remaining but to marry her and hope for the best with Navy. Needless to say, however, the only feeling I had for Emma was hatred, especially after her best friend confided to me that Emma told her the pregnancy was intentional. My parents, especially Mother, never believed that I was the father, though I never dwelled on it. Nevertheless, Ernie Suazo was right about Emma being bad news. I should have listened to him. Finally, Emma and I were married in a civil ceremony with a few of her friends attending. I kept my head down and mouth shut in what must have been among the most unhappy shotgun wedding ever. The mood was sustained when a sandstorm canceled graduation exercises and diplomas were mailed out. It was a great relief to graduate and leave Albuquerque for summer cruise aboard the battleship Wisconsin from Norfolk bound for Scotland and Denmark.
Would you have returned after the cruise for the marriage, Captain?
If Emma hadn't been so hatefully aggressive, yes. I suppose I might even have tried to make a go of it, given the chance. That option was never proposed until it was far too late. Looking back, it's obvious that Emma wasn't interested in marriage. After all, she never spent a day of her life cohabitating in one, did she?
No, but because she was Catholic, she felt she was always married to you.
I know she said that, Mike, but do you really believe it? Even discounting her former annulled marriage, there is the fact that she and I were married outside the church, so it was never blessed, and we never lived a single day as a married couple. Whatever, it doesn't really matter. If that rationale gave her a socially approved crutch to lean on, I was a very happy camper to be leaving Albuquerque with Bob driving his new Pontiac sedan, towing my 1929 Ford Roadster hot rod.
What happened to the 40 Plymouth and Bob's 32 Roadster?
Glad you asked, Mike. There are two more Albuquerque stories to tell involving the Roadsters. When Bob's parents gave him the Pontiac, he sold his 32 Roadster, and we sold the Plymouth. I then owned the 40 Ford Coupe for a short time, but sold it to buy the 29 Roadster. It was a beautiful classic hot rod, which won first place at the State Fair Auto Show that year. The father of the kid that owned it was a car dealer, and the kid also had a classic canary yellow 51 Mercury Coupe. When the kid was arrested on his second marijuana charge, the police told the father to get the kid out of the state or he was going to jail. So his father sent him to UC Berkeley. Since he could take only one car and preferred the Mirror, I sold the 40 Ford and bought the Roadster for $500. Bob was into drag racing, so I tagged along by racing the 40 Coupe and then the 29 Roadster, but I didn't see much fun in that, so I just had fun driving around town and the open roads. I never came closer to death than one afternoon taking a mountain curve too fast and came within inches of skidding off to a 2,000-foot embankment. Hey, that reminds me of another one I'll back up and throw in here. On a visit to Colorado Springs, I took Mother for a ride on a mountain dirt road in my 40 Ford Coupe. When I took a curve too fast and the right rear wheel went off the road on a steep embankment, Mother stuck the heel of her right brake foot shoe right through the floorboard. Another one of our little secrets we never shared with Father. So here's the other 29 Roadster story. While the whole family was in Munich, I sometimes went to the Armed Forces radio studio to watch Father's band record radio shows, where I met the sergeant announcer for Hillbilly Gasthaus, the most popular radio show in all of Europe. The show came on at 3 p.m. after Outpost Concert Classical Music Show with the announcement. Now let's listen to some good music. Well, guess who I ran into on campus one day? That announcer. He was out of the Army attending UNM, so we hopped into the Roadster and went to a Mexican bar for a beer. He happened to have a pint of bourbon with him, so we got good and blitzed. Interestingly, before the Army, he had been a radio soap opera actor in New York. But when he followed me into the men's room and stuck his tongue in my ear while I was standing at the urinal, I knew it was time to go home. I don't remember much about what happened, except fighting him off as we rounded a curve. When I came to, I had busted out my 2 front teeth on the steering wheel after we had gone through a telephone guy wire and hit a large tree. The whole front end was bashed. The gas tank and battery in the rear had pushed the back of the seat forward, and my passenger was unconscious with his forehead into the windshield. Thankfully, he soon regained consciousness, and we parted company, never to meet again. I walked to the fraternity house and woke up Jim so we could tow the Roadster home, but when we got there, it was gone. By then, I was sober enough to call the police to report it stolen. They have it towed. Their comment was that they didn't see how anyone had lived through it.
Fools, drunks, sailors, and children. Right, Captain?
You got it, Mike. I was damned lucky. Turns out that the Roadster wasn't so badly damaged. I found a great body shop that straightened the frame, knocked out the dents, and painted it as good as new for only $200. My front teeth were another matter. After a dentist told me what needed to be done and what it would cost, I asked if he could patch me up well enough to last until I was commissioned in 3 months, so the Navy would take care of me. He did some grinding and installed temporary caps for $40, and I was good as new for a while. One more Albuquerque Roadster story. Since it was a classic hot rod, without fenders or bumpers, I bought 2 motorcycle fenders for the front wheels and 2 trailer fenders for the rear wheels. One of my pals, who drove for a mortuary, said I could use their paint booth and equipment if I came in at night while he was on duty. While I was painting, he had a call to bring in a body from the hospital. When he asked if I would like to see the embalming procedure, I reluctantly agreed. The body was a thin old lady in her 80s, laid out on a tilted slab with her blood being drained down the side grooves, while the mortician was beginning the cosmetic enhancements. I was surprised by my unemotional reaction. It's amazing how lifeless a dead body is and how impersonal the procedure is. There really isn't much to it.
I'll take your word for it, Captain. You had some close-ups with life and death in Albuquerque, didn't you?
Yes, and there's another one I almost forgot, perhaps because it falls in the "I don't believe I'd have told that" category. I was sitting in my room one night talking to 3 friends when a brother who was a married photographer at Lovelace Clinic joined us. Since he didn't live in the house, we didn't see him often, but we had seen some photos he had taken at the clinic. The most spectacular one I recall was a series of the side vertical cross-sections of a frozen, stillborn human fetus. On this occasion, however, he asked if he could speak privately to me and one other friend there. He had been asked to recruit 2 volunteers with our general physical features to be sperm donors for an artificial insemination attempt, a pioneering procedure at that time. They would pay us $25 each for each attempt for up to 3 monthly donations. We had no idea what the procedure was, but of course we agreed. $25 was a lot of money to us, and such an interesting way to earn it. Sure beat giving blood. The doctor was a short, round, rosy-cheeked man who surprised me with his shyness. He explained that this was for a couple who were childless because the husband was sterile. Instead of adoption, they preferred this option. The procedure, it was explained, was simply to mix the sperm from 2 donors, for anonymity, on the back side of a diaphragm and insert it into the vagina at the precisely right time. I had to sign legal papers to declare that I would never attempt to learn the identity of the mother if we were successful. Finally, the doctor handed me a urine sample-type plastic cup and directed me to a restroom down the hall where I was to deposit the sperm. That was it. Simple as that. So down the corridor I went with my little specimen cup to what was nothing more than a closet with a toilet and a sink. Pretty sterile atmosphere for this kind of donation, not even any reading material. So picture this, Mike. There I am sitting on a toilet, trying to inspire myself, and an intern opens the door and stands there in shock as several nurses look in. It seemed like an eternity, of course, before the intern backed away, closing the door. Good grief, Charlie Brown. Now what? It wasn't easy, but it worked. The wife got pregnant first try, and that was the end of my professional sperm donor career. I was batting 1,000 in those days.
Is this a good stopping point for this chapter?